Welcome, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're exploring some fascinating Islamic scholarship, focusing on Ibn Kathir's commentary on Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran.
That's right, recited in every prayer. Understanding its nuances is really important for everyone who prays.
And Ibn Kathir really dives into this one point that I find fascinating. It's all about the Bismillah, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. So is it actually part of Surah Al-Fatiha? Should it be recited aloud during prayer?
It might seem like just a small detail, but it's actually sparked centuries of debate among scholars.
Wow, centuries. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What are the different opinions Ibn Kathir presented on the Bismillah's place in the Quran?
Well, some scholars, like Imam Malik, didn't consider the Bismillah an official verse at all. In any surah, I mean.
So not part of Al-Fatiha at all then?
Exactly. Others believed it was a separate verse, appearing before every surah, almost like setting the tone for what comes next.
A preface of sorts.
You could think of it that way. And then there's another group who argued that the Bismillah is actually a part of Al-Fatiha itself, and any other surah where it appears.
So we have three main opinions. Not a verse at all, a separate verse before each chapter, or part of each chapter. This is getting complex. How did these different views affect how Muslims pray?
That's where it gets really interesting. If the Bismillah isn't part of Al-Fatiha, there's usually no debate about reciting it aloud during prayer. But for those who believe it is as part of the chapter, then the question becomes, do you recite it aloud with the rest of the surah?
So the debate on recitation only comes up if it's considered part of the chapter itself.
Precisely. And Ibn Kathir brings up some pretty compelling arguments from both sides. For example, scholars like Ash-Shafi'i, who supported reciting it aloud, pointed to evidence like a hadith.
Oh, a saying of the Prophet.
Right, describing his recitation during prayer as unhurried.
So they're thinking, if the Prophet's recitation was unhurried, he must have been lengthening the Bismillah.
Exactly. There's also the account of Salama, one of the Prophet's wives, who described him pausing between verses, including after the Bismillah.
It sounds like they looked for clues in the Prophet's own practice to support their view.
Absolutely. And then there's the story of Abu Huraira, one of the Prophet's closest companions. He was known to pray with the Bismillah aloud, and even said his prayer was closest to the Prophet's.
Must have been quite a statement from him, considering all the different opinions going around back then.
Indeed. These accounts and interpretations give us a fascinating glimpse into how Islamic prayer practices developed.
But what about the other side? What evidence did those who opposed reciting the Bismillah aloud use?
Well, they also relied on hadith and accounts from the Prophet's life. Like Aisha, another wife of the Prophet, suggested he started prayer directly with Alhamdulillah, praise be to God, without the Bismillah.
Interesting. So even within the Prophet's own household, there seemed to be variations in practice. That's quite a revelation. Did this cause any confusion or conflict among early Muslims?
You have to remember that even with differing opinions, there was a deep respect for scholarly debate in the Islamic tradition. So differences in practice didn't necessarily lead to conflict, but rather a rich understanding of the faith, with multiple facets.
So they acknowledged that there could be multiple valid interpretations. That's quite a sophisticated approach to religious understanding.
Absolutely. And Ibn Kathir himself, while presenting both sides, doesn't actually endorse one view over the other. He leaves room for individual interpretation and emphasizes the importance of sincere intention in prayer.
So even if there wasn't like one right answer about reciting the Bismillah aloud during prayer, it seems like it's important for more than just, that one specific act.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Ibn Kathir actually recommends reciting the Bismillah before, pretty much any action, big or small. It's all about asking for God's blessing, seeking his guidance in everything we do.
Wait, really? Before any action? Like, what kind of actions are we talking about here?
He gives some examples. Entering the bathroom, doing wudu, ablution, eating. He even mentions reciting it before intercourse.
Wow, okay. That's not something I expected. It seems like such a personal moment to be invoking God's name.
Right, but it kind of shows you how Islam views the world. Like, God is present in everything, from the everyday stuff to the most, intimate parts of life.
I see. So even though there's debate about the details of prayer, the Bismillah is more of a general reminder to connect with God in everything we do.
Exactly. And Ibn Kathir takes this even further, exploring the meaning of Allah's names within the Bismillah itself.
Ooh, okay, let's get into that. I'm always fascinated by, the meaning behind names, especially in religion.
Well, it starts with Allah, the
Yep.
proper name of God,
Mm.
which includes all his attributes. It signifies, the ultimate source of everything.
So even just saying Allah is like a powerful invocation.
Absolutely. Then you have Ar-Rahman, meaning the most gracious. This highlights God's mercy towards all creation, whether they believe or not.
So even those who don't follow Islam are included in that grace.
That's the idea behind Ar-Rahman. It's unconditional love and mercy. And then there's Ar-Rahim, also meaning most merciful, but specifically for the believers.
So it's like a special kind of mercy for those who have chosen to follow God's path.
Yeah, you could say that. It shows a closer, more personal relationship with God based on faith and obedience.
It's interesting how Ibn Kathir makes a distinction between these two, Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, even though they both relate to mercy.
Yeah, it's subtle but important. It shows the different ways God's mercy shows up in the world. And to emphasize how important and holy God's names are, Ibn Kathir tells this story about a false prophet, Musaylima.
Oh, a false prophet. What did he do?
Well, Musaylima lived at the same time as Prophet Muhammad. He claimed to be a prophet himself and even called himself Ar-Rahman, tried to use God's name for his own purposes.
Wow, that's bold. Did people believe him?
He did get some followers, but his lies were eventually exposed and he was defeated. This story serves as, a warning. It shows how unique and sacred God's names are, especially Ar-Rahman.
It's like, even back then, people were trying to, misuse the power of those names.
Exactly. And Ibn Kathir uses the story to emphasize that true power and authority belong only to God.
It makes you realize how serious it is to invoke God's names. It's not just a casual phrase, it's a statement of faith and submission.
Right? The Basmalah reminds us that we depend completely on God's grace and mercy for everything.
And we should remember that in everything we do, right? From small actions to big decisions.
That's the core message Ibn Kathir is getting at, living our lives in line with God's will and seeking his blessings all the time.
It's really amazing how much we've unpacked just by looking at the Bismillah.
It really shows you how rich the Islamic tradition is, right? Even a phrase this simple can have so many layers of meaning.
And what I find so interesting is how universal the Bismillah is. Muslims all over the world, no matter what language they speak or where they're from, they say this multiple times a day.
It's definitely a powerful unifying force, connecting Muslims across everything. Cultures, continents, you name it.
Like a thread woven through their lives, from the little everyday things to the most, sacred moments.
And it's not just about the words themselves, but the meaning behind them. Recognizing God's presence and asking for his blessings.
That's what makes it so powerful, I think. It's a constant reminder that we're not, alone in the world, that there's something bigger guiding us, protecting us.
Right, and that can be really comforting, especially when things are tough.
It's like having this source of strength you can always tap into, no matter what you're going through.
And Ibn Kathir talks about how it's important not just for individuals, but for the whole community.
Oh, how so?
He says reciting the Bismillah before doing something, especially if it involves a group of people, can bring God's blessings and protection to everyone.
So like a group prayer for guidance and success.
Yeah, you could say that. It's acknowledging that we all depend on God and asking for his help for everyone's good.
I love that idea. Bringing people together under God's name and asking for blessings for everyone.
It really gets to the heart of what Islam is about, Community, compassion, working together.
So it's clear that the Bismillah is more than just a ritual. It's like a way of life, a guide to living with faith and purpose.
Reminding us to approach everything, every action, every interaction with reverence and gratitude for God's blessings.
And, it's incredible how even the very first verse of the Quran can be so thought-provoking, offers so much insight.
Really goes to show you the power of the Quran, doesn't it?
Well, that's our deep dive into the Bismillah. I hope everyone listening has a new appreciation for its meaning. It's such a simple but profound expression of faith that can really enrich our lives in so many ways.
I agree. And I encourage everyone to keep learning about Islamic scholarship and tradition. There's just so much to discover.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking knowledge.